You know when you hear an old story and think, okay, it must have been bad, but it couldn't have been that bad? Yeah, I've thought that way too. But when you start diving into the real details, when you read real accounts from survivors, man, it's scary. It's spine-chilling. And I have to confess something to you. I wasn't prepared. I wasn't prepared to discover how horrible, how unbelievable the plague was in human history. Have you ever stopped to think that there were times when entire cities practically disappeared from the map in a matter of days? Like, it's not an exaggeration. It's not a horror movie, it's real. People woke up in the morning, went to the grocery store, greeted their neighbors, and by the end of the same day, half of them were already dead. It's terrifying to even imagine, right? And I know that sometimes we hear these huge numbers. Millions of people died, and it loses its impact because the brain can't process it. But what if it were on your street? What if it were with your family? Have you ever stopped to think about what you would feel if, suddenly, every corner you passed was piled high with bodies? It's absurd, but that's exactly what happened. The plague wasn't just a disease. It was as if the entire world stopped turning for a few years. The silence, the smell, the fear. Reports from the time speak of cities that were so empty that wild animals began to take over the streets. Imagine the scene. You look out the window and see no more human movement. Only wolves roaming where there used to be a market, children playing, people talking. That's insane. And it's strange, right? Because today we live in a time when there's a lot of talk about pandemics, viruses, but the truth is that nothing, absolutely nothing, comes close to what the bubonic plague was. It didn't just kill, it shattered civilizations. It changed the economy, destroyed entire families, and even shook people's faith. Some people believed it was the end of the world. And looking at it like that, can you judge? Just to give you an idea, in some regions, for every 10 people, 7 simply disappeared. 7. Can you imagine leaving your house, looking around, and seeing only 3 survivors in every group of 10? That's chilling. And I keep asking myself, would we have the courage to face something like this today? With all the technology, all the knowledge, all the modern hospitals, would we really be prepared? Or would, deep down, fear, panic, and the survival instinct still take over anyway? What I'm going to tell you throughout this video isn't just about numbers, nor about dusty dates from history books. It's about pain, about despair, about the most fragile and, at the same time, most revealing part of our humanity. And in the end, I'm going to show you something that, honestly, changes everything. Something that will make you look at this period in history with new eyes. Because, as terrible as it was, there's a hidden truth in this tragedy that few people talk about. And that's what I want to reveal to you. But first, let me take you back to the first signs. Let me show you how it all began. Because that's when we realize how quickly life can turn upside down. Look, to truly understand how terrible the plague was, we need to go back in time. Imagine 14th century Europe. The cities were small, cramped, packed with people, narrow streets, garbage piled high, animals roaming everywhere. There was no basic sanitation, no garbage collection, none of the things we take for granted today. And it was in this perfect setting that the plague found its home. It arrived slowly, almost like a whisper. First, there were rumors from the east. There's a strange disease killing many people. Then, some ships began docking at ports with practically dead crews. And then the fear began to spread faster than the disease itself. And the scariest thing is that the plague didn't need much effort to spread. Have you ever stopped to think about that? A simple rat hidden in the hold of a ship, carrying infected fleas, could change the fate of an entire city. It's unbelievable. What today we would call an insignificant detail, at that time meant mass death. And, of course, at that time, no one understood what was happening. There was no scientific explanation. People looked at it and thought, it's divine punishment. It's the end of times. It was horrible, because in addition to the physical suffering, there was also the psychological burden, the guilt, the fear of experiencing punishment. Want a statistic that gives you chills just thinking about it? In some Italian cities, like Florence, the plague was so brutal that almost 60% of the population disappeared in a matter of months. 60%. Can you imagine? It's as if more than half your city simply vanished, overnight. And I know, it seems too absurd to be true, but it's history. And the first great lesson from all this is, small things, which we often ignore, can have gigantic consequences. It was a rat, it was a flea, details that seemed invisible, but that changed the history of the entire world. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Because when the plague truly spread, what happened next was even more shocking. It wasn't just about disease and death, it was about the total collapse of a society. And then, When the plague truly broke out, nothing could hold it back. Imagine a giant, devastating wave that swept away everything in its path. That's exactly what it was. In every city the disease reached, it seemed as if time stood still. The streets, once teeming with life, began to become scenes of horror. Reports from the time speak of carts passing by every day, laden with bodies, as if they were bags of garbage. It's terrible to even say this, but often the dead were thrown into mass graves, without names, without a goodbye, without anything. Can you imagine losing a family member and not even having the right to bury them with dignity? It's horrible, but that was the reality. And most shockingly, it didn't matter if you were rich or poor. The plague made no distinction. Kings, nobles, peasants, priests, children, everyone was a potential victim. And this is frightening because, suddenly, that whole idea of hierarchy, of security through power or money, simply disappeared. The disease leveled everyone out of fear. To give you an idea of the impact, in some regions the economy completely collapsed. With so many people dying, those who remained alive no longer wanted to work in the fields, no longer wanted to risk their lives. The result? Hunger, shortages, absurd prices, and then the physical suffering of the disease was compounded by the suffering of poverty. It was as if the world had entered a never-ending collective nightmare. And do you know what was even more disturbing? People began to distrust each other. No one wanted to get close to anyone. Families locked themselves in their homes. Neighbors denounced each other. Friendships were broken. It was every man for himself. Strange, right? The disease didn't just destroy the body. It also destroyed human bonds, the very thing that holds us together. And amidst this chaos, of course, the craziest theories emerged. Some said the air was poisoned, that the foul smell, the so-called miasma, was what killed. Others believed in conspiracies. It was the foreigners, it was the merchants, it was the heretics. Paranoia was so intense that entire communities were persecuted, accused of deliberately spreading the disease. How absurd. Besides the plague, there was also violence caused by fear. Have you ever stopped to think about what that really means? It wasn't just death itself, but trust between people, faith in humanity. Everything was crumbling together. It's unbelievable how an invisible enemy managed to cause so much damage. And there's another detail that few people remember. The plague even changed the way people viewed religion. Many thought it was the end of the world. Others thought God had abandoned humanity. Some indulged in extreme penance, self-flagellation, believing this could ward off punishment. Others simply lost their faith altogether. It's chilling to think about the psychological impact of this. And so I ask you, would we be able to maintain calm, faith, and solidarity if we experienced something similar today? Or would history repeat itself with panic, distrust, and social collapse? And the most incredible thing is, everything I've just told you isn't even the worst part. Because the real shock comes when we understand how the plague reshaped the entire world after the wave passed. And now comes the most shocking part of all. Because, as terrible as it was, the plague didn't end when the bodies were buried. It left scars that changed the course of humanity forever. Think about it. When you lose half a population, nothing is ever the same again. Suddenly, labor became scarce. And what happened? The workers who survived began demanding higher wages, better conditions, more respect. It's frightening to think that such a horrific tragedy ended up paving the way for social transformations that changed the economy of all of Europe. And that wasn't all. The plague so shook the structures of the church and power that many people began to question the system. It's as if that suffering had planted the seed of a silent revolution, which centuries later would explode in the form of new thoughts, new sciences, new arts. What a paradox. From such absurd pain, the foundation for the Renaissance was also born. Have you ever stopped to think about what this means? That sometimes the worst moments in history conceal within them the power of an unexpected transformation? It's chilling. And this is the great lesson of the plague. It was terrible, unbelievable, destructive, but it also showed how humanity is capable of reinventing itself after chaos. How? Even after fear, loss, and pain, life always finds a way to move forward. So, if today you feel like you're experiencing something heavy, difficult, almost unbearable, remember this. Humanity has already endured horrors that seemed like the end. And yet, we survived. We rebuilt ourselves. And, somehow, we emerged transformed. To summarize what you've seen so far, you discovered how the plague emerged and spread in such an absurd way. You understood the human collapse, the fear, paranoia, and social destruction it brought. And now he realized that, in the midst of this chaos, history also took a turn that no one expected. So, tell me, if you had lived back then, would you have the courage to face all this? What would you do? Would you run? Would you hide? Or would you try to fight for your life? Comment below, because I really want to hear your take on this. And of course, if this story made you think, if it gave you goosebumps in any way, like it, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. That way, you won't miss the next breathtaking stories I'll bring you here. Oh, and if you like this kind of narrative, I recommend you watch this other video right here, because it will surprise you even more. Until next time.